A useful model that shows how some of these ratios are connected is the DuPont model, or DuPont analysis. The DuPont model shows that return on equity is a product of the profit margin times total asset turnover times something called the equity multiplier. And the equity multiplier is simply total assets over equity. Note how the calculation of these ratios results in return on equity, which is net income over equity. If we examine MD Corporation's ratio values for this recent year and compare them to the industry averages, this is what we find. MD's return on equity is well below the industry average, but the question is what is the primary culprit? Is it the profit margin, which reflects cost control? If MD has greater control of its costs, its profit margin would be higher. Or is it volume, the total asset turnover, which reflects the amount of sales generated per dollar of assets? Or finally, is it the equity multiplier, which reflects MD's use of debt? The higher the level of debt, the higher will be the equity multiplier. Notice that when we compare these three values for MD to the industry norms, we find that both the profit margin and the total asset turnover are below average, and the equity multiplier is above average. The equity multiplier is above average because MD uses above average debt. Which of these first two measures, though, is the primary culprit to leading to low return on equity? Is it the profit margin or the total asset turnover? And as you can see below, the profit margin is 37% below the industry average. So that's the primary problem for MD Corporation. This is simply an example of how those percentage differences were calculated. A condensed version of the DuPont model is simply return on equity equals return on assets times the equity multiplier. And again, if we examine this for the most recent year, we find the same story. The primary problem for MD is return on assets, part of which is the profit margin. So what is our summary assessment of MD in terms of the DuPont model? Is its primary problem cost control, volume, or insufficient debt leverage? And the answer is the greatest problem is cost control. It's the profit margin that's most below the industry average. To a secondary extent, volume is also too low. Try this problem based on the prior year's values. If you don't arrive at the check figures below, please post your work to Moodle.